Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 2 of Echo Ekoji with Joe Gotchy and me, Andrea Chapman. Our aim is to illuminate the lay voice, and we plan to release programs regularly throughout 2024. Ekoji Buddhist Temple is situated at 6500 Lake Haven Lane in Fairfax Station, Virginia. We host in-person and streaming Sunday services at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and Dharma Breeze services led by Reverend Kurt Rye via Zoom on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Additionally, Ekoji offers seminars, book and movie discussions, meditation sessions, and special events like our annual Obon Summer Festival. More information about our temples, services, and programs can be found at ekoji.org. Joe, what else would you like to share about Ekoji?
Thanks, Andrea. Ekoji is one of 60 temples across the United States that make up Buddhist Churches of America. And like all BCA temples, Ekoji follows the Jodo Shinshu tradition. Shin Buddhism is a non-monastic form of Pure Land Buddhism founded in Japan by Shinran Shonin, who lived between 1173 and 1263. Shinran's wife, Ishini, and youngest daughter, Kakushini, played significant roles in establishing the Jodo Shinshu tradition and the mother temple of Nishi Hongwanji in Kyoto, Japan. Our primary practice is listening to the Buddha Dharma, or the teachings, and living a selfless life of gratitude. Our tradition is family-friendly and welcomes everybody as they are. Andrea, I believe it's time for you to introduce our second guest for 2024.
Thanks, Joe. It's my privilege to introduce Truc Vo, an Ekoji Sangha member and minister's assistant who will help us come to know Ekoji even better. Welcome, Truc. In a couple of minutes, what would you like to tell us about your secular self?
Secular self. Okay, that means non-religious side. Okay. Gotta remind myself. So I am True. I am Vietnamese American and I grew up in the Northern Virginia area, born and raised, still around in that area. I like to listen to K-pop as one of my fun little hobbies on the side. I guess that's a little short intro about me.
Very good. Thank you very much, True. Could you share with us a little bit about your journey into Jodo Shinshu Buddhism at Ekoji? Were you born into a Buddhist family, or did you discover and embrace the tradition at some point during your life?
I was born into a Buddhist family, but we mainly went to like traditional Vietnamese temples growing up. So it was more of a chanting and meditative practice. And we grew up going to various different Vietnamese temples, trying to find which one kind of fit our family best. And we did that for a while, but they didn't really have Dharma school programs and everything was in Vietnamese. And when I was younger, I was much more fluent than I am now. But at the time, the Dharma wouldn't really have gone through to me because I was better off in English than I was in Vietnamese. So the Dharma talks and things like that just weren't really clicking with us. And so after a while of going to Vietnamese temples, one of our family friends were like, why don't you come with us to a Tibetan temple in Maryland? Because they had Dharma school in English. And so we went to that for maybe a year or two, and it was just really far. And it was also not every Sunday. So my parents were like, well, we want something a little bit more structured, like an every week sort of thing that we can take the kids to. And so I guess they searched up online like English Dharma school or something. I don't know exactly how they found Ekoji, but somehow they found Ekoji and saw that they had Dharma school service and classes in English. And so when I was in fourth grade, I think, they took us to Ekoji and we've been there ever since.
Wow.
Oh,
It's been almost 20 years.
oh my goodness, I didn't know it had been that long. So, given even your own diverse experience with the various Buddhist backgrounds, do you think that there is a notable difference between individuals who are born into Buddhist families and those who convert or embrace the tradition later in life? And then, if so, how might those differences impact their understanding and lives as Buddhists?
So a lot of people I knew growing up were kind of Buddhist in name only. So their families may have been Buddhist, or like families going back generations were Buddhist. So they identified as Buddhist. But if you were to ask them, tell me something about the Dharma, they wouldn't necessarily be able to give you like a very detailed answer other than like, I believe in the Buddha, and we go to temple every now and then and offer food and stuff like that to our ancestors, or to like the Buddha, the shrine, for memorial services and things like that. If anything, a lot of times they weren't necessarily like scholars of the Buddha Dharma, but more so of the living Dharma. So they might live the Buddhist teachings in their everyday life, but they might not necessarily translate that to like, this is that concept in the Dharma. This is what the Buddha said that is. So I think that those who convert to Buddhism later in life typically have a greater appreciation and understanding of Buddhism, whether it be that philosophical, like doctrinal sort of side of Buddhism, or even the living Dharma part. But I feel like growing up in it, or just like when you live your everyday life, you tend to take everything for granted. And so I feel like those who convert to Buddhism, or those who find Buddhist or become more Buddhist in later parts of their lives, I think that they're more likely to be more appreciative of the Dharma.
True, that's just fascinating. Thank you very much for sharing that. I'm actually married to a heritage Buddhist, and she gives me a bad time saying, "Oh, well, you know more about that than I do." But of course, my response to her is, "But you live it every day," because it's just such a natural part of your being. So, having been a former Dharma school student, how has that experience influenced your overall understanding of Buddhism? And additionally, could you elaborate on the benefits of Dharma school, not just for younger Sangha members, but for their families as well?
Yeah, I think my experience in Dharma school really gave me a much firmer grasp on concepts like impermanence and interdependence, two very big concepts in Jodo Shinshu and other Buddhist traditions, but also in like wider Buddhism, things like the four characteristics of life chart, and like with like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and Eight Sufferings and all of that chart. Like I probably copied that chart of the four characteristics of life every week 3 times, because I would have my copy already that I brought with me to Dharma school. And then I would recopy that for my sister and our two friends. And I probably did that for like 2 or 3 years in a row as we learned the whole chart with like the 6 paramitas and 5 precepts and all of those traditional Buddhist concepts. So I really got a firm understanding of that chart, but don't ask me what the 6 paramitas are now, because I probably only remember like 3 of them. But also, one thing that I appreciated a lot about Dharma school was that we were allowed to question our teachers and question the applicability of the Dharma to our everyday lives. So it wasn't, I feel like a lot of times in religion, you're told this is the way and this is our teachings and stuff, and that's it. You have to take it at face value. But in Dharma school, I really felt like, especially Ken Nakamura, bless him and his patience for our class, because he really did indulge our many tangential arguments and discussions on why we did or did not subscribe or agree with a particular part of the Dharma or a particular sutra. Like, why is the translation for this sutra like this way in English? We think that that seems like a little bit like too anglicized, like Judeo-Christianized. And he would, take our feedback in and kind of push back sometimes when he had a differing opinion, or, accept our arguments for what they are, and, say like, that's a valid point. Like, why did we choose to, like, that's valid. If that's something that you don't agree with, that's something that you don't have to follow. So I think that that also helps my understanding of Buddhism, in that, like, you come as you are, you can take what parts of the Dharma that really apply to you. And sometimes not everything is going to be, you know, something that you can follow. Like the five precepts say, don't kill, but we also eat meat. So, um, things like that. Like, we're not always going to be able to follow everything to the T the way that the Buddha had lived way back in 500 BC.
Thank you. Yeah, that's
And
good.
then in terms of how it benefits
Mhm.
Dharma school students and their families, I think that Dharma school for me was a space where I could learn more about my religion, or how I view it as more of like a way of life, and hang out with kids with a similar background to me for a week every Sunday. And it was a nice change of pace from being told that, you're going to go to hell for not believing in Jesus Christ, which got a lot of growing up in a very Judeo-Christian society. Um, and so I think that, having a place of belonging, that sense of Sangha that the Dharma school provides, is not only something that the Dharma school students benefit from, but also from their families, because the parents all kind of sit around, waiting for their kids to finish class, and they kind of get to know each other. And it really does become like a Sangha.
Thank you.
So, of those three important roles that we've touched on that you've had, the Dharma school student, the Sangha member, and the minister's assistant, how have these varied responsibilities shaped your understanding of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism?
I think that the concept of causes and conditions became much more relevant as I grew up. So, because I was active in Dharma school, and Maya and Ken both saw my potential, they told me to apply for the Youth Advocacy Committee retreat back in 2011. And so I did. And during this retreat, I made some of the best friends in the world, and really learned so much about Jodo Shinshu and Buddhism in general, while being surrounded by other young Buddhists. And so, like, during this week, we had very limited access to our phones. We were having service 3 to 5 times a day. And each service, we would take turns doing various roles that a minister would perform. So that went from, ringing the concho, to setting up the Nijin, to cleaning up the Nijin, to being chairperson, giving the Dharma talk, serving as Chosho, or the chair, or the service leader. We got to really practice what a minister or minister's assistant would do while still in high school. And during that retreat, I really began to have a greater appreciation of Buddhism, for Dharma school, for just everything that had led me to that point. And that's when I started to become a little bit more, I wouldn't say like super mindful yet, because I was still in high school, but I started becoming a little bit more mindful of everything. And I think this retreat was kind of the catalyst for me becoming a minister's assistant later on, because when I came back, before, when I had to do Dharma school service, like, I always dreaded being service leader, even though it's really not like too bad. But, the fact that you have to sit up there in front of everyone, it's a little nerve-wracking. And, you have to sit up with good posture, and, pay attention to where you are in the chant. You can't, like, kind of lose pace, because everyone's looking to you to lead the chanting. And so when I came back, it was kind of like, oh, this is something where I can put the skills that I learned during this retreat to practice. And it wasn't a chore anymore. And so that training ended up coming in very handy every time we were in between ministers. And so before it was more of a kind of every now and then I would help out with setting up the Nijin or help with cleanup, or if they needed to, sometimes Reverend Hayashi would have me join him on the Nijin to kind of highlight the youth ministers that we have at our temple. Or, I think he had me doing Bodhi Day service before he left. And at the time, luckily, I only had to lead the sutra chanting. I didn't have to do like the Sambujo or the Vandana Tisarana or anything that now I have to do. But so like that training definitely came in hand. And I was like, okay, when we had a minister, I didn't really feel the need to step up because we had someone around. But then I think once I came back from college, I was like, okay, it's time to give back to the temple. And so at first I did that as a Dharma school teacher, and that was fine. I did that my Sunday mornings, and it was my way of expressing gratitude to the temple and Dharma school and the Sangha for, helping me become the person I am now. And I initially wasn't planning on returning as a minister's assistant just because my weekends were already busy with being a Girl Scout leader and then Dharma school. But then once Reverend Hayashi left us and we were told, it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get a resident minister anytime soon or for the foreseeable future. I knew it was only right for me to put the training that I had been able to receive because of the temple to practice. And this was a way that I could help. I might not be able to be a paying member yet, but at least I can help out with regular Sunday services to ensure that folks have a place to come to where they can hear the Dharma through, chanting and through Dharma talks.
Well, True, we're really thrilled that you took on that responsibility and that you've embraced being a minister's assistant. As a female minister in a traditionally male-dominated role, for whatever causes and conditions may have brought that about, have you faced specific challenges or discovered unique opportunities? And how has Jodo Shinshu Buddhism perhaps influenced your approach to navigating these challenges and opportunities as a female minister?
So, a more trivial challenge would be chanting at the same pitch or tone as the male ministers or the male or minister's assistants, because a lot of times I either have to pitch way higher or way lower in order to kind of be at the same tone as them. So that's a more trivial kind of challenge. I wouldn't say that I've faced any particular challenges necessarily for being a female minister's assistant in that, like, in terms of like discrimination or like barriers to becoming one. In fact, I think if anything, a lot of people have come up to me and been pleased to see like a young woman in a role of leadership at the temple. And so if anything, like, I'm just so grateful for the extra support that's been given to me because people want to see me succeed as a female. So I think that the way Jodo Shinshu has kind of influenced my approach to being, a female minister's assistant is just to being like keeping in mind gratitude at all times, like just being so grateful for all the support that I receive.
Thank you very much.
And we are so grateful that you have had this opportunity to, True. So how would you say that you integrate Jodo Shinshu Buddhism into your daily life? And what personal and professional benefits do you derive from our tradition?
So I actually have given a couple of Dharma talks on how I've integrated, or how I try to at least integrate Buddhism with my everyday life. The first talk I gave was about, accepting change and impermanence, because one of the big concepts in Jodo Shinshu Buddhism is that concept of impermanence and how, nothing stays the same. So in that, I try to view change as an opportunity for growth, despite it maybe seeming like a setback at the time. So like when Reverend Hayashi left, that seemed like a setback at a time. Like we weren't going to have a minister for a while, but then it's an opportunity for growth. I can practice my chanting. I now have opportunities that most minister's assistants would never have. So I could really learn and be able to serve my Sangha. And then my next Dharma talk was about the middle path and being mindful. Still personally working on this, but I tend to go to the extremes when working and neglect myself for the sake of work because I get so zoned in on whatever I'm working on that I'll either skip lunch or I'll start my lunch and then not end up finishing it until like hours later because I just was so focused on my work. But that is something that I'm working on getting better at, being mindful and, just not going too far in the extremes of that mindfulness. So, taking time, taking a step back to take care of myself. And then another aspect of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism that we often talk about is compassion. And my most recent Dharma talk, I talked about the golden chain and how the golden chain, we kind of look at it through the lens of outward compassion, but we often need to also focus some of that compassion towards ourselves. And so I try to be a little bit forgiving when I make mistakes and stuff. And so those are kind of three big things that I try and do, but also just trying to live mindfully, act with purpose, and keep in mind the potential impacts my actions have on others, that concept of interdependence. Those are all things that I think have kind of stuck with me a lot in my everyday life.
Great. In our introduction, we talked about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism being a layperson's Buddhism. It's non-monastic. So I'm going to follow up on what you just told us. When you think about your workplace or your everyday life, can you give us an example of how Jodo Shinshu Buddhism has helped you make a decision or maybe go about completing a particular task?
Yeah, so I will actually go back to my example with Reverend Hayashi and their family being reassigned to Denver. So I was honestly pretty upset when it happened. And I think part of that was, the ego, the self-centered wanting to keep someone familiar close, keeping my loved ones close to me. And initially when they were reassigned, I felt like it was kind of unfair. Like we're one of the few temples on the East Coast. Like, doesn't it make sense that we can have a minister? But then, I thought about it and I was like, that's really not a Buddhistic way of thinking, one. But also, we have gone through times before at Ekoji where we didn't have a minister. And I think that during those times was actually when I saw our Sangha as its strongest, because that's when everyone came together. They stepped up to make sure that the temple could continue to run, even without that religious leadership that we had from the minister. So I think that helped a lot, changing my mindset about and using Buddhism to change my mindset about certain situations. Like when people refer to karma, they're often like, oh, like this is good or bad karma. But really, karma is just karma. It's just an event. It can be viewed as good or bad, and it's really how you put your mind to it. And so I think that understanding of Buddhism really helped me grasp the situation and handle the situation a little bit better. And then it also reminded me, to be grateful of the time that I had left with Reverend Hayashi, because he did announce it maybe a month or so before he actually ended up leaving. So in that month that we had left with them, I really, really, really did treasure my time with them and made the most of it.
Nice. Thank you.
In what ways do you see Jodo Shinshu Buddhism contributing to the community building and creating a sense of belonging amongst Ekoji Buddhist temple members?
So I see the concept of interdependence playing out a lot at creating that sense of belonging, because when you think about it, none of us have the same path that led us to Ekoji. All of us had many, many different causes and conditions that led us there, but somehow we all ended up at Ekoji. And so that in and of itself gives us at least that foundational sense of belonging, of Sangha. And I think even beyond that, like just like the concept of gratitude and compassion, things that are so abstract, but in Jodo Shinshu, I feel like really becomes more tangible because we look for it in our everyday life. It's not just this philosophical concept. It really is all about the living Dharma. And I think that that makes it more applicable to the Sangha members and then also fosters that sense of belonging.
So let's concentrate now on younger Sangha members. Can you share with us any kind of an initiative or a project that perhaps Ekoji's undertaken to bring the Dharma to younger people?
Well, I do want to give a big shout out to Nick and Wyatt for bringing the YBA back to Ekoji. I had started the Ekoji YBA, or junior YBA actually, when I was still in high school after coming back from the Yak retreat. But after a couple years, after I think few years after my younger sister went off to college, the YBA kind of dissolved because we didn't have enough members. So to see it come back is super heartening. But also, I am probably a little bit overwhelmed with everything else. So I am fortunately not super active in the current iteration of the YBA. But I am still on the BCA Scouting Committee, and through that, we help facilitate the Buddhist Scouting Awards like the Meta Award, the Padma Award, and the Sangha Award for scouts to learn more about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And as part of that, we kind of help others who aren't traditionally coming from a Buddhist background learn more about Jodo Shinshu.
Thank you.
So, would you say that there's a specific Buddhist text, passage, or teaching that holds a particular significance to you personally? And could you share it with our audience and explain its impact on your spiritual journey?
Well, I will be the first to say that I am not the biggest Buddhist scholar. So I don't have a particular text or passage, but I do have a teaching that holds a lot of significance to me, and that is the middle path or the middle way, and impermanence and interdependence, obviously. But when times are bad, I know that it won't last forever and that I just need to persevere because one, life is suffering and there's no avoiding that. But two, all suffering will also not last forever because, again, everything is impermanent. And so I think that while this also might be cliche, I wouldn't be able to appreciate the good in my life without having the contrast of also having difficulty. So I think that not going in excess of overly happy about something, because then you can also be very much opposite end, very, very, very sad when you no longer have that piece of happiness. And so just knowing that things ebb and flow and that's just life, I think has really helped me with my spiritual journey and knowing that things will change, but that is not always a bad thing.
I like that as well because the tradition really helps us in our day-to-day life. So having that as background, now I'm going to ask you to look forward as you work your way through your life and follow a Buddhist path, the middle path. Do you have a goal in mind? Is there an ultimate path destination that you have in mind for yourself?
I would say that my ultimate goal is just to continue to practice gratitude every day and to give back to the varying communities that have given so much to me and my family, because it's so, so, so easy to take things for granted. And I think a lot of times just showing a little bit of gratitude, even for something really small, can make all the difference to someone else. And I think another thing nowadays, I think what's lacking in the world a lot of the time is just bare minimum compassion and empathy. And so one of my goals is just to continue and try and be more empathetic and compassionate towards others, because you really never know what someone is going through and what their story is, and how much your kindness or even just bare minimum courtesy can really make all that much of a difference in their lives. So I think that, practicing gratitude and compassion and empathy, those are three really big major things. And while it doesn't seem very significant or lofty, I think that it's something that everyone can strive to do a little bit more of.
Beautiful goals. In your role as one of Ekoji's minister's assistants, you lead our Sangha in chanting. For those who are unfamiliar with Buddhism, why do we incorporate chanting into our services?
So growing up, I also had this question because I was like, why am I showing up to temple every Sunday and then having to chant something in a language that I don't understand? Um, but at the end of the day, chanting is really kind of a meditative practice, almost as a way for us to kind of ground ourselves and prepare ourselves to hear the teachings, to hear the Dharma. Because if you notice, our sutra chanting is always followed by the Dharma talk. So it kind of just settles us, because a lot of times when you come into service, maybe you were coming from, you were stuck in traffic, so you're kind of still focused on that, or you're thinking, because it's Sunday, you're fixating on, oh, this is all the things I need to get done before I have work tomorrow, or that, and so chanting, though, you have to focus on what you're saying, what you're doing at the moment, and that kind of primes us to then be more receptive and focused on when we hear the Dharma talk for the day. So that's how I kind of view it now. Like, it's a way for us to just kind of dial in and focus, because it's very noticeable when you're not dialed in and then you end up chanting the wrong thing, like I did last Sunday.
We wouldn't have known that. Thank you. When we interviewed Michael Huff, we asked Michael to choose between Shinran or Renyo. And today we'd like to ask you to choose between and tell us why you might gravitate toward either Ishini, Shinran's wife, or his younger daughter, Kakushini. Both played important roles in the founding of our tradition. Do you have a favorite between the two?
So both women had major, 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 major contributions to Jodo Shinshu. And while I think that Ashini's role by Shinran's side and, being there as our school was starting to be founded, I think that shouldn't be forgotten or downplayed at all. But I do think that I would pick Kakushini just because of her efforts because I believe her efforts really enabled Jodo Shinshu to persist to this day. I think without the initial steps that she took to preserve, the teachings and preserve a location for our school, I think that her actions really did allow Jodo Shinshu to continue to exist beyond her father and his legacy. So I will have to say Kakushini.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, True. So our final question for you and all of our guests here on Echo Ekoji is, what does Ekoji mean to you?
Ekoji really is another family to me. I've been there for almost 20 years now. This year will actually be 20 years. So a lot of the Sangha members have actually seen me grow up from when I was in fourth grade until now, a semi-adult. And I really feel like it's not just a Sangha, it's truly a family, like a community that genuinely cares about not just your well-being, but about, because, we do have Sangha members whose families don't necessarily attend temple or who are far away or, have friends who might not be Buddhist and stuff like that. But, when things happen outside of the temple and outside of our immediate Sangha, the Sangha does rally around the person who's currently having difficulties. And I think that sense of community is hard to replicate a lot of times. And I'm just super, super grateful to have found this community, this family, this Sangha. So
Thank you, True. On behalf of the Ekoji Buddhist Temple in Fairfax Station, Virginia, we thank you for watching this episode of Echo Ekoji. Please like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and watch us on YouTube. We'd like to thank Truc Vo for sharing her insights and thoughts with us. Visit ekoji.org and BuddhistChurchesOfAmerica.org for more information and resources concerning Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. Ekoji's mission is to create a worldwide Sangha through our in-person and streaming services and programs. Along with Gotchy, I'm Andrea Chapman, and we're grateful for your support and encouragement. Namo Amida Butsu.